What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and I'm joined by Tyler. We are back for another video in our Avengers Endgame community series, a community series that airs every single Thursday on our channel, leading up to Avengers Endgame releasing in theaters on April 26th. We've had a lot of videos already covering theories and discussions about Avengers Endgame, and we have several more coming up as we get ever so close to this movie releasing. We're going to be seeing it night one. We'll have tons of videos after the movie is actually out, talking about the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, talking about the movie itself. And in this video, we want to do kind of an interesting theory, a different kind of topic about Avengers Endgame. Really, we haven't gotten a lot from the trailers at all, and Tyler and I both believe that's going to be a major theme going forward. Even at the time we're recording this, it's several weeks before the video goes up, but we don't expect to see much of this movie before we actually get there. But we do see a little bit of Tony Stark, and Tony Stark, very, very important character. We had a lot of videos about him last year that we'll link in the description. But we want to talk about in this video of why we believe that Tony Stark will quit the Avengers once he returns to Earth. Now, him and Nebula are stuck. We see in the trailer that they don't have much longer to live. They've ran out of food. They've ran out of water. The oxygen will run out the next day. Now, there's theories of who's going to save him. Is it Pepper Potts? How is he going to get back to Earth? But we want to talk about what's going to happen to him once he actually gets down to Earth, kind of from what we know of the film, the very little that we know of the film. And so we're going to go from there. Maybe we can talk about where Tony's journey is going to take him through this movie. So Tyler, why do you believe Tony Stark will end up quitting the Avengers?
Well, so there was a shareholders meeting, and they were shown a very exclusive trailer. So if you don't want, it's an accurate. There's multiple sources that were in that shareholders meeting that have all said the exact same, not exactly the same to make it where it's like they're just copying, but they've all said details that all fit. I would say 100% it's spoilers. So if you don't want to know certain things for Avengers Endgame, I would just don't watch. And that was your last chance because I'm about to start. So in that trailer, they're in a spaceship. Rocket Raccoon he's piloting the ship, and he asks who's been to space, and really nobody's been to space before. So he basically says don't throw up. And so we see in that group, that's in the ship, Nebula is there. And we know that and they're on Earth and they're about to go to space. And we know that Nebula, we know this from Infinity War, we know this from the I think it was in the Super Bowl trailer. So we know that Nebula is with Tony Stark in space. So the fact that Nebula is on Earth to be in that ship with the rest of that group means that Tony Stark and Nebula make it to Earth. And then she goes back up to space with them. So the character that's not in that ship is Tony Stark and Scott, Ant-Man. They're not in that spaceship. Those are the only two, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that are not in that spaceship. So that's the whole basis for basically this video. So I believe that when Nebula and Tony Stark make it back down to Earth, that with what took place in Infinity War, with half the population dying, basically the Avengers failed. Tony Stark failed. And he kept saying I put us down this road, and all he really wanted with the Avengers the Ultron program, he just wanted to defend the Earth, and he failed. That's how he's going to feel. And we know that as Tony Stark as a character, he really does puts a lot of stuff on his shoulders, and when he fails, you can tell it bothers him a lot. So I assume what happens when he gets back to Earth, he's just done. I assume he's going to see Steve, who he probably still is kind of upset with a little bit, and just seeing him, but knowing everybody's dead, he probably just can't handle anything. I don't think he has a mental breakdown, but mentally, I think he can't take the loss that the Earth and others have suffered, and he would know that it was others because he saw Drax die, right? And Drax wasn't from Earth. So he knows, it's not just Earth where people died. So I think he mentally can't handle it, and he kind of naturally he would quit because he's not associating himself with the Avengers, and he kind of just hides himself away. And I bet you he hides himself away for a couple of years, and who knows how it all goes down. So what I think, so having said all that, I'm almost certain that he obviously, again, naturally quits the Avengers, doesn't associate, kind of hides himself away. Now, we know in the Infinity War, trailers and TV spots, there was a few scenes that were not in the movie, and that was purposeful. They tricked us, those dirty dogs. They had a scene where Cap and Black Widow and Black Panther and the Hulk were all running towards the screen. And we know that never happens, and we know that Hulk's really not even in the freaking movie. So we know that they put stuff in trailers that are not there. And what I think is one of them, and this is a big detail, is at the end of the first trailer for Endgame when Scott is at the door and he's talking to the camera, and Cap's like, "When was this taken?" And she's like, "Today," or something like that. I don't believe that's in the movie. But what I do believe is that Scott part is in the movie. I think, so we know that Scott, from Ant-Man and the Wasp, we know that Scott is trapped in the quantum realm for a while. We obviously know that he gets out. I think that when he gets out, he can't seem to find anybody. And I think that he ends up finding Tony Stark. And the reason that I think that, and you might be saying that sounds stupid, but it isn't. The reason I think that is because think about what Scott says to the camera. He's like, "Remember me? I got really big." And why? Think about it. Captain America remember they shook hands, and he's like, I forgot what Scott says, but he says kind of something funny. And he calls him Captain America and all that stuff. Like, he literally stood next to Ant-Man, and he got back the shield from Spider-Man because basically Cap told him to. So Captain America essentially recruited him. He directly met him. He would remember Scott. He broke him out of prison. So he would remember Scott. So the fact that he would say, "I got really big," why is that the thing that he would remember? Not, "I just remember you. I remember your voice, and we stood next to each other. I remember you." And Steve totally would remember, regardless of how many years have passed or whatever. But then when you think about it, Tony Stark really never met Scott. Because when he visits them all in prison, and Scott says something to Tony, and Tony just goes, "Who are you again?" And it kind of is like, oh man. Like that, he legitimately doesn't even know who this guy is. But he does remember, Tony would totally remember that when they had their little civil war, one dude got really big. That would stand out. In other words, like, I'm that guy in that suit. I'm the guy that got really big. Now, with that context, to me, that makes way more sense. Because again, Steve would totally remember the guy. He shook his hand, he said funny things, he told him, "Go get my shield." He's like, "Okay, Captain America." And he did. All of that totally makes sense. He might get ripped in half, and then Bucky's like, "He's gonna get ripped in half?" And I feel that Steve would completely remember him. Tony totally wouldn't, but again, he would know, like, oh yeah, there was that dude that got huge, that was this guy. And then, if they started talking and said, like, I was in the quantum realm and this and that, and he would explain the quantum realm and all the stuff and what it's capable of and how time doesn't exist or you can traverse time and this and that, and how he came out. And maybe Scott found his daughter, who's a lot older now, and we know that they cast an adult woman to play Scott's daughter, so she's not a little girl anymore. So Scott would know, like, okay, it's been like a long time that I was in there, so time did a weird thing. So he'd be able to tell Tony all of these things, and maybe, just maybe, Scott is the hope that, Scott basically brings hope to Tony again. That's what brings Tony back and says, you know what? Maybe we can do this. This could be our last shot, but maybe we can do this. Maybe we really can go back, and maybe we can save them all. So, to me, that that scene makes so much more sense when you think, like, no, that they inserted that Cap and Black Widow thing into the trailer to make us think one thing, but really he's doing it, and he's doing it to Tony Stark. That makes more sense. Remember that, so Steve broke Scott out of prison, and Scott and Hawkeye, they kind of go their own ways. They don't go with Steve. They don't go in hiding with Falcon and Black Widow like we saw in Wanda and Vision, like we saw, and we kind of assume what happened between Civil War and Infinity War, how they were on the run. But we do know also, don't forget, that Cap goes back to Wakanda for Bucky, who's getting his new arm. So Scott, really, he would only know, like, okay, well, they're in hiding or Steve's in Wakanda. That's all that he would really know. He wouldn't know that they're at the base. Like, to go to the Avengers base, which, yes, he went to in Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man movie, and he fought Falcon. So he would know that the Avengers base is there. But to be at that door and be like, hey, remember me? There could be nobody in there. He doesn't know who lived and who didn't. For all he knows, they could still be in Wakanda. So I don't think that was Avengers base. I think either he found Tony Stark, or maybe it is Avengers base, and Tony Stark's there or something. But personally, I don't think it's Avengers base. I personally think he finds where Tony Stark is living. And that was at Tony Stark's home. That's personally what I think. And again, that makes way more sense, because there's no way for Scott to know who's even still alive, and that they're even there. There could be nobody at that camera. So he knows that somebody's home. So that, to me, that adds to it. And to top all of this off, one thing that we can look at are set photos. So we know that there's a set photo, and it's of Tony Stark, who clearly looks a lot older. His hair is actually more gray. And he's at the events. He went back and he has something on his hand, which we saw in promotional pictures on Black Widows. He went back in time to the first Avengers movie, and we know that based on Captain America's outfit from the Avengers movie. Now, who is the only other character, other than old Tony Stark, who is the only other character in those set photos at the time of the first Avengers movie that was not there? Ant-Man. He also has something on the back of his hand. So possibly, did Scott basically tell Tony Stark about the potentials, like time travel, quantum realm, all of that? Did they together build a device to harness the power of the quantum realm, and they together test it by going back to the time of the Avengers, the first Avengers? Maybe Tony needed to see something or something like that. But is that what happens? And then they return back to the future, or not really to the future, to the present. And then Tony kind of looks at Scott and's like, we need to we need to bring the Avengers back. In other words, like, we can all go back in time. We can all fix this. That makes sense. And again, it's Tony and Ant-Man, not anybody else. So to me, that Tony, Ant-Man, or Scott relationship that I just set up completely makes sense now. So to me, this theory, and I've seen a couple people or other people online talking about it, but I was kind of wondering it for a while myself. I didn't feel like that scene was it just seemed out of place. And then when I read a couple days ago that Nebula's on the ship going to space, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Where's Tony? So clearly something happens with Tony, and then I remembered what I just said about the set photos. Or where's Tony and where's Scott? And then I started to put it together, and I kind of came to the same conclusion that others have come to as well. I think this is a very solid theory. So I'm excited to see how it's going to actually play out in Avengers Endgame.
So when Tyler brought this theory up to me, I thought this was a really, really good theory. I thought that it makes sense, the Scott Lang thing and talking about the whole trailers. It's something that I think a lot of people should be aware of, and the fact that they do pull these things with these trailers, but not necessarily something that I think a lot of people could have caught. I mean, at this point of the game, and again, we're recording this video much earlier than the video is actually going up, but we have two main trailers, you can call them. They're really actually just slightly longer longer than TV spots, basically. But we're not getting that much from this movie, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could still throw fake things at us like they did in the last trailer. So the whole Scott Lang thing being put in with Captain America and Black Widow does make a lot of sense that they're not actually connected. They could both be scenes in the film, but they don't have to necessarily be about the exact same thing. They don't have to actually be the same scene. And like Tyler said, it does make sense. What he's saying, how he's describing himself, basically makes it sound like he's talking to someone who doesn't know who he is, okay? And that person probably isn't Cap. I mean, they know each other. Scott Lang is a huge fan of him. He even talked about how kind of starstruck he was when he met him in Civil War. So I feel like also if he were to be talking to Cap, he maybe would make mention that like I'm your #1 fan or something like that, or I don't know, like I fought with you, or it doesn't. His words don't necessarily sound like he's talking to someone who does have kind of remote ways of knowing who he is. They were also in jail together, so they probably knew each other a little bit from there. So it does make sense. And the Tony Stark thing, he's going to go on quite the journey in this movie. I think he's going to be one of, if not the most important Avenger. Last time we're seeing him, he's retiring after this movie from Tony Stark. So this is his last chance for whatever the Russo brothers want to show us. And it makes sense that he's going to go through so many things. And like Tyler said, he puts a lot on him. His character has always been one where he shoulders a lot of the responsibility, for better or worse. A lot of times, and basically with the Ultron thing too, he did it in the wrong way. He put everything on himself and thought he had to do everything, thought he had to be the ultimate protector. And so he really shoulders a lot of the blame. He shoulders a lot of the responsibility, and he puts a lot of it on himself. And the fact that they lost, the fact that Doctor Strange gave Thanos the stone, and yes, he said we're in the end game now, and we kind of know from theories and just from talking about it so much that Doctor Strange probably saw the right way to do things. That doesn't necessarily mean Tony Stark knows it right away as well. And all he knows is that Thanos got an Infinity Stone to save his life. So he probably feels really bad about that as well, that he contributed to Thanos becoming more powerful. And also just the fact that they lost. He had friends in the Avengers that are now gone. A lot of people are dead or, just disappeared. So, he probably feels terrible about the fact that he couldn't, put everything together and he couldn't save everybody like he tried to do and wanted to do. So it makes sense for him to kind of go into exile, just exile himself and say, you know what, I can't live with what happened, and then he'll have to be brought back in some way. And it could be Ant-Man, or it could be some other way, but the Ant-Man idea is a really good theory. So let us know in the comments below, what do you guys think of this theory? Do you have any theories of your own as to what happens with Tony, as to what happens with Scott? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel, Podcast Now. Hit the bell icon so you guys know when all of these videos go up. And again, our Avengers Endgame community series releases every Thursday on our channel, leading up to Avengers Endgame releasing in theaters on April 26th. We'll be covering the movie to death when the movie actually releases, and we got another video for you next week as well. So we hope to see you guys there.